So if you recall, we've been discussing dynamic programming, and I had told you that there are these 5 steps that you can systematically apply for a problem, and that will help you give a dynamic programming solution for the problem. So there are some typical class of problems where it's very easy to see that the dynamic programming algorithm is going to work. These 5 steps are going to be very easily, or at least very methodically applicable. And one such class of problems is a string manipulation or sequence manipulation problems. So let's look at some of the examples of such problems. One such problem is called the parenthesization problem. So here you are required to figure out the parenthesization of an expression that minimizes the overall cost of evaluating the expression. So I will give you an example of that shortly after this. But essentially, maybe you have a long expression, say, of plus and multiply and so on. And maybe certain multiplications takes lesser time as compared to certain additions or vice versa. So suppose there are costs attached to multiplications and additions, then one could ask what is the best possible parenthesization that will minimize the cost of the overall computation of the expression. And these kind of problems are often uh, solvable using dynamic programming paradigm. Another class of problems that are solvable, another string operation that one could want to do on strings or sequences is finding the longest increasing subsequence. So here you are given a string of positive numbers and you're required to find the longest subsequence that is increasing inside it. So for example, I have uh, certain numbers given to me. Okay, so you may find multiple increasing subsequences inside this. So suppose I decide to start with 3, then I take 7 into account, then I have this increasing subsequence. But is this the longest one? Possibly not. Here is another one. It starts with 3. Then instead of including 7, it includes 5. Then includes 8. This is also of length 3. Instead of including 8, it could have included 7. But you may find a subsequence which is possibly even larger than 3, length 3. And then that would be the longest increasing subsequence if we can find such. So probably in the example I have given, maybe there is no subsequence of length larger than 3. But in order to do this, you can imagine that the kind of things that we need to do, the kind of possibilities that may arise could be exponential if I try to do this naively. For example, whether to include 3 or not are two possible choices. Having included 3, some numbers just get discarded because a subsequence which is increasing, sorry, this doesn't get discarded, but for example, 2 just gets discarded because if a subsequence starts with 3, then 2 can't be inside it, but some other numbers continue to stay alive. And maybe most numbers continue to stay alive, then there is also again a choice between whether I include 7 or not. So there are two possibilities of that. And now depending on whether I included 7 or not and whether I included 3 or not, whether 5 will be there or not will be dependent on that. And as we go forward, if we try to do this naively, you can imagine that this will lead to an exponential number of possibilities for for checking whether addition of a certain number into the currently formed subsequence creates a longest increasing subsequence or not. So if I do this naively, the running time of the algorithm is likely to reach exponential even. I can come up with strings where it does become exponential. So what one needs to in fact do is use dynamic programming efficiently, and that is doable for this problem. Another interesting problem that one could consider is, given a long string of letters, find a way of segmenting the strings into chunks such that the segmentation segmented string is a statement in English. So, you could have I, A, M, O. Okay. So here, of course, segmentation is unique, possibly, in the English language, and that would be very easy to find. But you can imagine there are strings where multiple segmentations are possible, each giving rise to a correct um, word. Okay, so for example, my language is something where I have words like this, and so on. And now I give you, so this is word number one, this is word number two. My language is not English. I have some other language that I deal with. Maybe I have some, genomes or something like that. So now I string together a bunch of these P, A, P, and now you will be able to see that maybe there is no here there is no segmentation, because of course three P's are just not possible in my language, but some other things could be possible. Yeah, so suppose this was an A, then I may be able to find multiple segmentations of this, and all possible segmentations are required in this problem. So this is the segmentation problem. Longest common subsequence problem is similar to longest increasing subsequence problem. It's also about subsequences. But here you are given two strings of letters, X and Y, let's say, two strings of numbers or letters. And you're required to find the longest subsequence that is common to both. Yet another problem could be edit distance problem. You are given again two strings, X and Y, and find the smallest number of updates needed to be done to convert X into Y. So for example, I'm working over binary alphabet and my X is just this and say Y is 110. Then in fact, X to Y is possible by omitting this 0. Or alternatively, in adding, so from Y to X, one can go by adding this 0, but I'm asking whether I can go from X to Y, so then I can do that using deletion. Another possibility is that say X is 1010 and Y is 1101. Then the edit distance between these two words is, so the edit distance between these two words, the first example is just 1. Because if I allow in my set of updates deletion of letters, then just by doing one deletion, I can go from X to Y. If I allow flip of the bits, then here the edit distance between X and Y is 3, because I have to change 3 bits in X to the opposite ones and obtain 3. On a larger alphabet, you may have a different version of this edit distance problem. Okay, so these are some set of problems that are solvable by dynamic programming. In fact, one can systematically write those 5 steps I told you about, which we will do for one of the problems right away. And then you can solve them. So these problems are actually presented in the tutorial sheet of this week. And that tutorial sheet is included in the syllabus for the midsem. So I encourage you to go through that tutorial sheet, discuss with your TAs, and we will also circulate an open doubts sheet where anonymously or with your name, whichever by your choice, you can post your doubts. And in the same sheet, we will also answer your doubts. Not in the same sheet, in a related sheet, we can answer your doubts. So we will anyway asynchronously continue this, and there will be some synchronized sessions we'll try to organize. You please talk to your respective TAs and get that scheduled if you want. Okay, so these are the set of problems which are of interest for us right now, because they are all solvable by dynamic programming in the dynamic programming paradigm. Okay, so let me pause for 1 full minute to see if there are any questions about these problems here. If you understand the problem statements here, it will help you because you will be very easily able to solve the tutorial next.
Ma'am, the subsequence is not necessarily consecutive, right?
Yes. So the doubt is whether the subsequence is necessarily consecutive. No, it's not. It can be any sub part. For example, over here, the red underlined things form a subsequence, increasing subsequence. Correct. Any other questions? Okay, great. So what we are going to do next is actually try to solve the substring problems, one of them. So the typical steps, let me recall and let me show you what they typically become for these string problems. So step one we've said was figure out what the subproblems are going to be. And usually in these string problems, either it's an interval, it's a suffix or a prefix. So typically these are or it may be a substring sometimes. Okay, so that's a nice thing that defining subproblems, looking at the problem often is quite easy in this case. Then you need to define a recursive procedure as to how, given the information about some of these subproblems, that you can construct a solution for the bigger problem. This is usually the clever part of developing a dynamic programming algorithm for such string problems. So here is where one needs to pay close attention. And it depends heavily on the problem itself. Then the next thing is to decide your memoization strategy. Typically, what will work is to store the optimal values for subproblems. This will typically work. Check that the subproblem dependencies are acyclic. Again, as I had said earlier, if you have defined your recursion very well and your subproblems are defined correctly, so the clever part is correctly done, then this should not be very difficult to argue. We will see in a couple of examples next. And then finally analyze the time complexity using the recursion. So you have defined the recursion above, maybe in step 2. Use that and do the time analysis. Okay, so this is how it will work. So let's put it in action now. Let me solve the parenthesis problem for you and show you how it can be applied. This framework can be applied to a specific problem. So let's go back to the parenthesization problem. You are given a string of, say here you are given a string of matrices. And now you want to find minimum cost parenthesization to multiply matrices. So what do I mean by that? Imagine you had these 3 matrices. A is a n cross 1 matrix. Okay, it's like a column vector. B is a 1 cross n matrix. So it's a row vector. and C is a column vector again. So suppose I try to first multiply A with B. Okay, so my one possible parenthesization is I multiply A with B first, and then the resultant is multiplied with C. In this case, the total number of operations will be n square, because when I multiply A into B, it will be a n square matrix, n cross n matrix. And then when I multiply it with C, it will again become a n cross 1 matrix. The resultant will be n cross 1. Resultant will anyway be n cross 1, but intermediately if I decide to parenthesize A and B first, then first I'll end up creating a n cross n matrix, so it will have n square entries. So to fill every entry, I say require one order one time. So I will need some n square steps in order to fill these n square entries of this matrix. But on the other hand, if I decided to parenthesize differently, I decided to parenthesize B, C first and then A, multiply the resultant with A. Then in fact, it will be great because this will be just a 1 cross 1 matrix and this will be a n cross 1 array. So overall number of operations will be only order n in this case. N operations to compute this, and then n more operations to compute the multiplication of these two. So the picture here demonstrates that not all parenthesizations are equal when I'm trying to do matrix multiplication. One of the parenthesization intermediately computes a very large matrix, whereas the other one never computes a large matrix. And if I were to look at longer strings, you can imagine that there are exponentially many possible ways of parenthesizing this string. In fact, the number of ways of parenthesizing any expression is very close to something you would have seen in your combinatorics course, which is namely the Catalan number. So that's an exponentially growing number. So the total number of ways in which an expression, which is a large matrix, large number of matrix multiplications, uh, the total number of ways of doing it is exponential. But you want to find the way, one way, or one of the ways, which requires minimum number of overall operations while computing the matrix multiplication. Okay, so you want to find the best parenthesization. Here, the best means the one that leads to as small intermediate matrices as possible. Because if intermediate steps lead to large matrices, then overall cost increases. So here we are required to find the best possible parenthesization. So what is given? Every input, we are given n matrices, and for each matrix we are told what is the number of columns for that matrix and what is the number of rows in that matrix, Ci cross Ri. And we want to find the minimum cost parenthesization to multiply them. Okay. I'm going to take a 30 seconds break to see if there are any questions. Okay, fantastic. So let's run through the 5 steps required in order to come up with the dynamic programming paradigm, or put this in the dynamic programming paradigm, the solution for this problem. So the kind of subproblems that I will come up with will be as follows. Okay, suppose we guess that the last operation of the best parenthesization. Okay, just a second. Yeah, sorry. the last parenthesization operation for the best parenthesization is this. That is, like in our previous case when we had 3 matrices, the best one was this one. And then this. So in that regard, suppose I try to come up with the best one. Suppose somehow somebody tells me that the optimal one is when you break it at k. Okay, so these two subproblems are in fact the best. Good. If this is the final operation you do, then it's going to be the optimal. So suppose I somehow have an optimal way of computing this parenthesization and this parenthesization, then and somebody tells me that kth, if you break the topmost breaking point of this parenthesization is at this kth location, then it seems like I could work with such subproblems. We could try to guess the best possible breaking point and keep going further and further into subproblems. Then this starts to look a lot like prefixes or suffixes. But let's conduct this thought experiment a little further. And next time, suppose now to compute the subproblems inside the interval 1 to k and k plus 1 to n, we try to examine it even more closely and say that, oh, inside the first one, k prime is the place where we have to break to get the optimal multiplication for a1 to ak interval. And to get the optimal multiplication for the k plus 1 to n interval, we need to break it at k double prime. If this is what we observe, if this is what somebody comes and tells us, then really to build subproblems at any given time, I may have to look at sub-intervals rather than looking at prefixes or suffixes. Yeah. These are essentially substrings, but not just any substrings, they are sub-intervals. So we denote these by, so a specific subinterval of multiplication of matrices between matrix number I all the way to matrix number j, we depict it as A of ij, where ij stands for the interval. So now I have done step number 1. I may have to, come back and fix this step number 1. Because later steps may tell me that, what your choice of subproblem definition was not quite right. It should have been something else. So, this may be something that when you try to solve problems on your own, you may have to go back and forth with a little bit. Okay. So, but in this case, let's just say that this is what we are going to do. Let's commit to this strategy for now. And now, let's see what happens next. So, step number 2 is to come up with a recursive procedure. So, let me call the recursive procedure para of I, j. What is this recursive procedure? It computes the minimum cost parenthesization of the substring of matrices or subinterval of matrices defined by the interval I to j, both ij included. We will assume that I is strictly less than j. That is, we have this ai plus 1, etc. up to aj. Then here is one recursive call I could make. Okay. I'll say that recursively compute para of ik, recursively compute para of k plus 1 to j, and add to it the cost of computing the final top multiplication. So suppose I have ai to ak, this is multiplication, and then ak to aj. Right? This cost is the cost of final multiplication here. So suppose this turns out to be an M cross N matrix and this turns out to be an N cross T matrix. Then the overall final output is going to contain N M cross T many entries. Okay, so anyway, it is easy to compute what this cost is. The total number of operations required to come up with entries of this M cross T matrix at the end. That's the cost. But now, because I don't know what the K is going to be, what the optimal K is going to be, what I'll have to do is I'll have to do a minimum over all possible choices of K. So this is not a single recursive call to a specific K value. This requires you to have access to all para values for K between 1 to J. I must have, for instance, already computed para of I plus 1, para of I plus 2, para of I plus 2, and para of I plus 3 to J, and so on. You know, all possible subproblems that arise by sliding K between I to J. I need all those values to be computed prior to this particular thing. Once I have those values, I can use them, compute min across all these possibilities of K, and now that's what I'm going to call para of Ij. This is slightly different from the divide conquer strategies, where sort of the K was a priori known to us in most situations. There, the recursion did not require us to go min over or go max over or optimize over a choice of K when we were recursing down to subproblems. Here in dynamic programming, because parenthesization is such a problem where really I don't know which among them is eventually going to work out. I need access to the recursive calls to all of them, and then I need to take the minimum among them. Okay, so there is a difference between the way we are writing this recursive procedure and this recursion and some other recursions we have seen in the past. Okay. Let me pause for a minute and see if there are any questions. Okay, great. So this is the recursion. This is kind of the difficult step generally, okay? So because I've directly told you what the actual answer is, it may not seem difficult. Possibly I should have created a presentation where I also make an error in coming up with this and then we fix it. I've not done that, but there are 5 problems I've uploaded on this week's tutorial. Please go through them. They'll be useful for you to get used to this sort of a exercise of coming up with the recursive procedures and so on. Okay, defining subproblems, coming up with the right recursion, etc. So now we are at step number 3, which is memoization. This is not very difficult. What we are saying is just store the values for all subproblems. This cost ijk is something that I can compute on the fly, because you will tell me what is the dimension of, say, the subinterval ik of the matrix aik. If I know its dimensions, and if I know the dimensions of this matrix, these are single matrices obtained by multiplying all matrices in the interval I to k, for instance, here, and k plus 1 to j here. If you tell me the dimensions of this, I can tell you what is the cost of computing the multiplication of these two matrices. Okay, so that is a very trivial thing to do, and therefore this can be done on the fly. We don't need to store anything to compute this beforehand. But what we need to store are these intermediate values ij. And we need to start doing this from building smaller intervals. Okay, so typically this dynamic programming storage mechanism is depicted like this. This is say 1,2. This is 2,3. This is 3,4, 4,5, 5,6, 6,7. So here you put down the value of multiplying matrix 1 and 2. Here you put down the value of computing matrix 2 and 3. Here you put down the value of computing matrix 3 and 4, 4 and 5, etc. And now I'll try to come up with this entry. This entry is the best way or the smallest cost required to multiply the first three matrices, 1, 2, 3. This is the best way to compute 2, 3, and 4, and so on. And I keep doing that till I'm able to fill this final value. And note that when I'm trying to compute this value, I will use lot of previous values. Yeah, I could use 1,2 and 2,6, which may be somewhere here. Then I could use 1,3, which is here, and 4 to 7, which may be somewhere here. Okay, so all these previous values may be required to compute this, not just this and this. Okay, so we build this from smaller to larger intervals, keep filling these entries as and when we can. And then finally, actually, we need to compute this final entry, which is the cost of multiplying all matrices, 1 to 7. And we do that by looking at all these different entry possibilities of, multiplying 1, 2, and then 3 to 7, or multiplying 1, 3, and 4 to 7, 4, 7, etc. We have, so inductively, suppose we have all these values already filled, then we look at all these, and then, cost of this we already know from that entry, cost of this we already know, so we add those costs. We add the cost of multiplying the matrix formed by multiplying first two matrices and the matrix formed by multiplying matrices within the interval 3, 7, and then add that. And that will be one of the entries that one of the costs I'll consider in order to fill this value. I'll do it for all possible breaking of the interval 1, 7 into two parts. And for each one of them, I will have from the pre-computations and this small little computation of the cost, all these entries will be available with me. I'll have 6 such entries. Then I'll take min of these. And that value will be put inside this cell. But finally, the memoization is just saying what table I store. And I'm saying that we store this table that is shown here. Often you will see in textbooks and so on, they always show such a picture for memoization. Now, one has to also argue that the problem dependencies are acyclic, but like I told you before, if you define the subproblems carefully, then this step is kind of easy most of the time. So we saw that para subroutine requires the values stored for the smaller intervals to compute the values of the larger intervals. So we are never forming any cycles and dependencies. Only smaller ones are being used to compute the larger ones. Finally, the time complexity of this algorithm. I'm not talking about the overall cost. The cost depends on the problem statement. But the complexity of this algorithm depends on our procedure that we have defined so far. The total number of subproblems we have are n square, like I showed you in that table, right? So this table consists of n entries over here and n entries over here. And this is of the order of n choose 2 actually. N choose too many entries are over here. So that's order of n square. So total number of subproblems we will look at in order to finally fill this value are O of n square. And for one for each interval ij. And the time per subproblem is the time needed to compute the mean over the set of values. For an interval ij, there are j minus I different values. Like I told you, for interval 1 to 7 in the previous picture, there are going to be 6 min values we get. Okay, and we have to find the min among them. That will take time O of the length of the interval. In the worst case, the time per subproblem is O of n. So the total amount of time is O of n cubed. Okay, so that's the whole thing. That's the whole thing with the subproblem. So what we have managed to show is run those 5 steps for the parenthesization problem, matrix parenthesization problem. I hope the gist of this paradigm is clear. And this particular paradigm is easily applicable, or at least with some thought is applicable to string related problems, string manipulation problems like the ones I told you about earlier, or some related problems. So if you see the tutorial sheet, you will find such problems. And the tutorial sheet is part of the midsem. So please go through the problems. Another 30 seconds break before I move on to the next problem that we are going to look at in dynamic programming. There is one question. In the worst case, what do we mean by worst case? The largest interval. Yes. By worst case, I just mean the largest value j minus I can take, which is the largest interval, length of the largest interval. Correct. All right. So should I move on to telling you about another problem that we will be looking at, which is the shortest path problem. And you might say that I have already seen this problem in my data structures course. Dijkstra's algorithm is applicable. But notice a small difference here. Yeah, here the weights are allowed to be negative. Yes?
అవును ఇప్పుడు ఎన్ని కావాలి ఇంకెప్పటికి కావాలి ఎప్పటికి
How do I mute everyone?
ఇప్పుడు ఇవాళకి ఉంటాయి కదా.
All right, I think it's fine. Okay, great. So notice the small difference here, which is that here now the edges are allowed to be negative, allowed to have negative weights. Okay, so this is slightly different. Dijkstra's algorithm was applicable when the underlying graph had positive integers on them, and now we are allowing negative integers. Okay. So one point to note is that the task is very similar to Dijkstra's algorithm. Here the only difference is that the weights can be negative, and we haven't said anything about the graph having cycles or no cycles. So suppose I tell you that weights are allowed to be negative and the graph is allowed to have cycles. Then what is the shortest path problem then? Or rather, let's just say 1 and 1. Now notice that if I just take this path, its weight is 3 plus 1, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay. Instead, suppose I take this path. Then 1, 2, 3, 4, minus 5. So now the weight, if I go along this path, I've accumulated, so maybe let me make this even larger. Now here the issue is that if I go along this path, I accumulate 2, 3, 4, I do minus 10, so this becomes minus 6, 7, 8, 9. So, sorry, I'm saying something wrong, but I hope you understand what I'm trying to say. Let me repeat it. So if I take this direct path, then it costs me around 7. But instead, if I go via this cycle, then I add this part twice. So I get 6 from here, 7 and 8. So because I go like this, then I come down like this, and I go like this. So I get the contribution from these two twice, which is 6, 7 and 8. But then I get a minus 10 contribution over here. So when I do this loop, at the end of this, I have accumulated minus 2. So I get 1. By the time I reach here, I have minus 2, so that's minus 1 plus 3. So overall 2, cost is 2 of this S to T path. It's not exactly a path, but I just want to come up with a way of getting from S to T. I shouldn't possibly call it a path, but I want a way of getting from S to T with as less cost as possible. And this example tells us that in fact, I go through this loop once, I accumulate minus 2. In fact, if I keep doing this loop infinitely many times, then I can reduce the cost of going from S to T to an infinitely small value. So having negative weights and having cycles in the graph seems like two opposing conditions if I'm trying to look for a shortest way to get from point A to point B. And so the problem cannot make sense in the sense if you find a negative cycle in this graph, this cycle is called a negative cycle because if you add all the weights along this cycle, then the overall cost is less than 0. And if you have such negative cycles in a graph, then in a graph along the way from point S to point T, then in fact you can make the cost of reaching S to T by traversing this negative cycle infinitely many times to minus infinity. So in that sense, the problem is not that interesting if both these conditions are simultaneously present in the graph. Maybe the right question to ask in that situation is to find whether the graph has a negative cycle or not. Okay, we'll come to that problem shortly later. But for now, let's just say that let's assume one of the two conditions is not true. So let's keep the negative weights because that makes it slightly a problem different from Dijkstra's problem. But for the problem to not go to this negative cycle issue, let's say that the graphs we look at are acyclic. So this is the problem description now. The graph is acyclic. So the way to get from S to T is never through a cycle. So indeed, we are trying to find the shortest path now. But the weights are allowed to be negative. Okay. So in this situation, first question that should come to our mind is Dijkstra applicable? Can I just use Dijkstra's algorithm as is? Okay. But here is a very simple reason why Dijkstra's algorithm may not work. Okay, this picture is from the textbook itself. You can come up with many such examples, of course. So notice that this graph is acyclic. The exact weights from the textbook may not be these, but the point will be conveyed nonetheless. So I want to find the shortest path from S to T. Suppose I try to apply Dijkstra's algorithm. Okay. What will Dijkstra's algorithm say? It will try to build a set S. So initially, it will only contain the singleton element S, because the cost of going from S to S is 0. So it will be there. Now it will say, look at all the nodes that are adjacent to S. In this case, there are U and V. And now the minimum will be realized along the path that starts with the smallest weight edge. So then my S will get updated in the next round to S comma V. And the minimum cost. So now my S is looking like this. But note that indeed, this is not the correct choice for finding the smallest path from S to V. Here, by storing SV as the optimal set, in a way I'm suggesting that the best way to get to V is via this edge that locally seems to be the lowest. This sort of reasoning makes sense if all the weights are positive. That is that at no later point will you be able to find a path that leaves from a weight edge 2 but reaches V with a cost smaller than 2. Suppose all weights are non-negative, then you know that if you leave S along the edge that is weighted 2 as opposed to the one that is weighted 1, then eventually to reach V via this edge is going to cost you strictly more than 2 or greater than or equal to 2. However, as soon as I allow for negative weights, this sort of a reasoning which we use implicitly inside correctness of Dijkstra's algorithm stops to work. Because now, though locally 2 seems to be a worse choice for S to take, globally it is indeed the right one. So, putting it all together, it is telling me that this greedy-like structure that Dijkstra has, that it just locally looks at the neighborhood and keeps track of the nodes which are leading out of a certain node with minimum cost. This sort of a way of accounting for overall costs is not going to work if there are negative weights in the graph, even if there are no cycles. Okay, so a simple thing like this, which we used in Dijkstra, is not going to work. Okay, at this point, you may say things like, okay, fine, this is not working. Why don't we simply scale everything by a large positive number? Okay, so suppose you give me a hack that, well, you have negative weights in this graph, but let me give you a simple hack by which all weights will become positive. And now can you apply Dijkstra? So for example, I tell you that just update the weights of this graph to plus 10 on every edge. So I just add a fixed large number to the weights of all the edges. Okay. So that's a good hack, right? Because now look at all the weights. So this weight now has become 12. This has become 11. This has become 5. And this has become 11. Okay. And now if you see, actually, this is a longer path. So what Dijkstra will do will be correct in this graph. But there is a small problem here as well. This sort of a thing may not actually, so this actually scales the weights of the graph equally everywhere. But does it indeed construct the actual cost? Does the output obtained by this particular method correspond to the actual smallest path in the original graph? So take for instance the following graph. Suppose in order to make all the weights non-negative, I added an offset of 3 to each. And now the overall weights have become like this. Okay. Originally in the graph, the smallest weight path was this one, because its weight was 3 plus minus 3 plus 3, which was overall 3. Whereas the weight of this one was 4. But in the now scaled up version, the minimum weight path or the shortest path from S to T is this one. So if I feed this graph to the Dijkstra's algorithm, it will output the green path as the optimal one, but this is not the correct answer. This is wrong. The correct answer should have been this lower path. So just scaling also does not help. Just scaling and applying Dijkstra's does not help. Okay, so what we've convinced ourselves of is, in any direct way, it does not look like Dijkstra's algorithm is going to be applicable. Okay, so then what? Okay, so that's where we are going to use an algorithm called the Bellman and Ford's algorithm. We will have a live interaction tomorrow, and we will go through the details of this algorithm tomorrow. Okay, so with that, we will wrap up today's live interaction. If you have any questions, please stay back and ask. If you have any mid-sem related questions, logistical questions, or if you have any other things that you want to bring to my notice, please wait and ask me. You can put it in the chat as well. Otherwise, feel free to leave.
Ma'am, is there going to be an assignment this week?
No assignment this week. The tutorial is something you should pay attention to though.
Yes, ma'am.
There is a question, what proctoring method will be used for midsem? So I'm asking you to register on SAFE. So it will be a combination of SAFE plus video. We are working out the details. We'll have a mock sometime this week. It won't be Code Tantra. Can you please list some practical applications of shortest path with negative weights? Yes, surely. I can, maybe I'll do it tomorrow in the beginning of the class. Yeah. I think the class wanted that I don't use Code Tantra, so I've decided to not use Code Tantra, yes. If any other questions or comments, please put them up, or else feel free to leave also.
Hello,
Yes.
ma'am. I wanted to ask that the three type of problem solving methods we saw, they're all like they all seem to be based on recursion.
Not all of them are recursion, but you're right that they depend on a smaller problem, and then getting the solution for the smaller problem and putting it together leads to the bigger problem. But more like divide and conquer and dynamic programming rely more on recursion, whereas greedy is sort of quick progress into smaller sub problem and then waiting for the larger one to come up with its answer.
Even in greedy, like we solve a problem at hand, that, like the problem that is right now we have, and
Yeah.
then we solve a smaller sub problem, right?
Yeah, in some sense you are right in that as well, but often the kind of greedy algorithms, the way they work, it's like f of n equals f of n minus 1 plus o of 1 or something like that. So the recursions there are more or less trivial often, is what I'm trying to say. But in divide and conquer and in dynamic programming, you actually need like the full power of recursion where the two sub problems are equally hard or something like that. I mean, this is not a recipe, but it's kind of a reliable trick to remember.
Okay, okay, got it. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think if there are no questions, I will end the meeting.